All right, guys, we're gonna be doing a lower body workout today, primarily focusing more on the quads. Typically how I do my leg training is I'll split up quads and hamstrings. So I'll start with a more of a quad bias workout in the beginning of the week. And then later on in the week, I'll do a second leg day where I do more of a glute and ham focus with a little bit of quad. So one day's quad focus, a little bit of hamstring, and the other day's more hamstring and glute with a little bit of quad. Pretty much every single leg day, I start with a calf raise, and generally it's gonna be a standing calf raise. And in fact, I pretty much always use this one because it has this pad that allows me to keep my hips up against it, which in turn will allow me to generate much more stability in the actual movement. So my hips won't be moving around at all. A few reasons why I like to start with calf raises. One, generally I just have more energy in the beginning of my workout. If I were to save them towards the end of my workout, by then I'm already exhausted. So I probably won't be able to push as hard as I normally would, and I probably would skimp out on a few sets. So by starting with them, I have more energy and I can generate way more force and stimulus on my calves in a more timely manner. And then also, second main reason is it warms up my ankle joints. So because I'm doing more of a quad focused leg day today, I want to make sure that my knee travels over my toes as much as possible. So by warming up my ankles, allows me to really stretch out my calf and just gives me that much more mobility, as I said, for when I'm training quads. So I've already done 2 warm-up sets. I'm gonna go in to do another 2 to 3 working sets. So we'll get after it right now. Now again, I treat this like every other exercise. I'm particular about going to failure on this, including partial reps. Lengthened partials is a big thing for calves, but I'll do a set and I'll walk you through my form. Things that have actually worked for me. Now I know I don't necessarily have the biggest calves ever, but these are things that definitely actually worked in the development of my actual calf growth and strength. So first and foremost is going to be foot placement. I just use a shoulder width stance, nothing too wide, nothing too narrow. I don't really think about pointing my toes in any direction. I just kind of keep them straight, or if anything, just slightly turned in. For me, that's just comfortable. I think that comes down to preference. Now, when I actually place my feet on this platform, I'm making sure that I'm giving myself a lot of real estate in my foot and in my shoe. So when I place my foot, I want actually almost half of my foot on this platform. This is going to give me more surface area to push off of and give me a lot more stability. Otherwise, if I'm pushing strictly off my toes, yes, I might feel like I'm getting more range in the movement, but I'm having less surface area on the bottom of my foot. My shoe starts to slip and I actually can't generate as much force in the actual movement. So big thing is have almost half of your foot, primarily right under the balls of your feet, on this platform. And then next, if your machine has it, press your hips into this pad. If your machine doesn't have it, keep your hips and knees as stable as possible through the entire movement. Now, as I'm pressing, what I'm thinking about is driving my ankles, not more so up, but actually pushing this ankle joint forward into this machine. And then as I come down, I'm actually actively pulling my foot or my toes up towards my shin, pulling that ankle joint back and down. So pushing forward and up, not just thinking about up, and then thinking about pulling toes towards my shin and pulling that ankle joint or heel down towards the ground, squeezing this tibialis muscle. Now, lastly, most importantly, is as I'm pressing, I don't want you coming out or rolling onto your toes, primarily on your pinky toe. That's a very common mistake. One thing you want to think about is pressing through the ball of your toe or right underneath that big toe. So if anything, I'm driving my ankle joint in towards the other ankle joint. So I'll show you what that looks like. Now again, I'm trying to make sure my knees and hips are as stable as possible. This way it allows me to generate as much force in my calves as possible. So I'm coming down, pulling my toes up to my shin, squeezing, and then driving through, but driving those ankles forward, but also in towards each other. So again, I'm not rolling out onto my toes like that. The goal is to get as deep as a stretch as possible. All right. We're gonna do 2 more working sets of that to failure, and then we're gonna move on. So that's probably the heaviest that I'll go. Again, I'm just aiming for trying to go as heavy as possible because I find that's what works for me. And then again, aiming for that 8 to 10, 12 rep range. I don't really like doing 15 to 20 at that point. Usually if I do that, it's on a drop set. Oh, and then lastly, for rest time, I generally keep it around a minute, maybe 2 minutes. I treat this like every single other exercise. My goal is to generate as much force into the calves as possible. So I'm not trying to just rush through it or do myo reps or just 30-second rest time. I really want to get the most out of every set, go as heavy as possible, and make sure that my first rep is almost as good, or just as good rather, than my last rep. Now I may not get the full range, but that's okay because that's where I include the partial reps, the lengthened partials that is. So I'm coming all the way down, and even if I come up a quarter of the way or at most a half rep, I'm okay with that because that's the whole point of a partial, is to create as much stretch and tension in the muscle and kind of stay within that stretch and lengthen range the entire time. So this is gonna be the last set. We're gonna do 1 drop set just to squeeze a little more out of the calves. All right, we're gonna move on. I'm actually gonna be doing a belt squat, but we're gonna do quad focus. So I'll show you the setup for that. Reason being is, 1, The machine that I wanted to use is taken, but actually better yet, I've been dealing with some neck discomfort and trap pain. So if anything, I actually have been avoiding loading my traps and neck too much. So this is actually a great alternative if you're experiencing that, because this is primarily just hip loaded. So you wear this belt, and like I said, we're gonna be focused more on the quads. So there's a few key things I want you to think about. One is gonna be foot stance. You're gonna keep your foot stance how you regularly would when you're performing a leg press or just a regular squat. So for me, that's gonna be roughly shoulder width apart. Now, I want this line of force, or rather where this is hooked in, to be directly underneath, or sorry, my feet to be directly underneath that. So in other words, I'm not gonna be standing further back like this and have this belt pull me forward. I wanna stand directly over top, feet shoulder width apart. Now the biggest thing for targeting your quads on this is maintaining an upright posture the entire time. So I don't wanna be leaning forward and creating flexion at my hip. I'm keeping that chest up, and I'm making sure that I'm upright the entire time. I'm allowing my knees to track over top of my toes, so I'm not sinking back like this, pushing those knees forward, and then pulling them in, squeezing my quads. So knees come forward, pushing them forward, pulling them back, squeezing the quads. So I'll do one warm-up set there just to kind of gauge the weight, and then I'm going to get right into the working sets. Probably throw another plate on. And again, the rep range I'm just aiming for the actual working reps. I'm aiming for anywhere from 8 to 12 reps, or 10 to 12. Again, going to failure. I'll be pyramiding these sets. So this is still going to be a working set, but I'll probably increase gradually for each set. But I mean, this movement in particular gets pretty difficult the heavier you go. So it's a little deceiving. You start with a plate, feels good, throw another plate on, feels okay, throw a quarter on, and then you start hitting a wall. But yeah. So one thing I think about, and I'll try not to talk too much because I kind of want to get into this, but one thing I'm thinking about when I'm doing any of these pressing movements for legs is my foot pressure. So just like the calves, similar in the idea, I want to create as much surface area. I actually don't want to be pressing on the outsides of my feet. For me, I'm trying to keep this mid part of my foot flat against the surface that I'm pressing through. So I'm keeping primarily all that pressure in the middle of my foot, not rolling out to the edges, not coming out onto my toes, having my heels elevated, and I'm not rocking back onto my heels. There's a time and a place for some of those, but generally I want to create as much surface area on the bottom of my foot, drive that middle of my foot into the platform. That's just going to create much more stability and leg drive and prevent my heels from elevating through the movement, especially when I'm training the quads, because the whole goal is to get as much knee flexion as possible. So in other words, I want this knee to get over top of my toes as much as possible without my heel elevating. So it's just something to think about. I think I'm going to do another set there and again push it to failure, and then we'll do 2 more at a heavier weight for a total of 4 working sets. Ah. Oh. Ah. 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 3 more. It was ugly. That's what. Oh, shit. It was an ugly set. Be better on the last set. This will be our last set, and we're gonna go to complete failure on these. Ideally, trying to complete a rep on the last rep, but I'm okay with stopping halfway and just dropping. Squeezing every little bit I have out on this. 6, 7. Come on. Last one. That's it. Stuck. Oh, shit. Okay. We're gonna move on to some leg press. 4 sets at leg press. Again, we're doing high volume lately. So I'm doing higher rep ranges. Sorry, mid rep ranges, but higher sets. I've just been finding that has worked well for me in the past. Like I said in the previous video, I deviated from that. Did a little lower volume, a higher frequency. And I find training a muscle group twice a week at a mid to higher volume, 20, maybe 30 sets, depending on the muscle group per week, split up into 2 sessions, has worked great for me. So I recover fairly quickly so I can kind of get away with it. Anytime I'm not recovering, I do usually pull back just a little bit. Yeah, we're gonna start with leg press. Sorry, we're gonna go on to leg press. 4 sets. I'll do one warm up, but it's more so just a gauge set just to see how much weight I feel like I can do at this particular moment in this particular session. I'll start with 4 on each side, just because I know I can definitely get around 10 to 12 reps at this weight. And then I'll just progress from there. Now, I'll do a set first. I'll just shut up. I'll do a set and then I'll explain to you my thought process. So I'm dying. Undecided, but I think I'm going to count that as a working set. Might be a little overzealous today, but that felt heavy. I mean, that kind of happens. Didn't get much sleep last night, so that could be a contributing factor, which is most likely the case. Hence why I was might be a little spacey when I'm talking, but we're gonna count that as a working set. So I've got 3 more. I am still going to increase to 5 plates, and we're just gonna see ideally how heavy we can push it with, again, the depth is the most important factor of this. I really wanna stretch my quads, so I'm bringing my knees as far back as I actually can go comfortably and physically. And we're just gonna see how heavy I can do that before I throw up. When I say I'm bringing my feet, or my knees, sorry, back as far as I comfortably can and physically can, what I'm talking about primarily is called, I can't think right now, hold on. is called my active range. Don't know why I can't think of that right now, but I just thought of it. So, active range versus passive range. Quick little intro to that. Active range is going to be what I actively can work through with my muscles still engaged, or the opposing muscles rather also engaged. So if I'm training chest, my active range for, let's say, a chest fly is going to be how far I can actually physically, actively pull my arms back. Passive range is allowing that weight to pull my arms further than what I actively can. Now, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that if you get into a passive, but be very, very cautious when you do that. I'd advise against it, because if you're passively letting the weight control it, when you get heavier to a certain load, you run a greater risk of injury, because now you're letting the weight move your joint or move that limb past the active range or active mobility. So something to think about. I advise against using passive range. So if I'm doing leg press, I'm not letting the weight push my knees back behind me. I'm literally in the bottom, actively pulling my knees as far back as I can, getting that stretch. Controlling the weight is the biggest thing. Oh wait, I didn't even go heavier. Fuck. Okay, set number 2. 10 to 12 rep focus, working in a deep range the entire time. Six, 7, 8. Five. Ah, fuck. Come on. God damn it. One more. Got one more set. I'm gonna stay at that weight, which I believe is 6 plates. Not bad. But again, my goal is not to go into the depths of like ego lifting. I'm trying to stay in a deep range the entire time and just go as heavy as I can manage in that range. I could do probably 8 to 10 plates on each side if I kept my feet together, had them higher up on the platform, and only came down to about here. But that's not my goal. My goal is to take and train the quads to their entire range of motion in this specific movement. So I'm placing my feet lower on the platform, shoulder width apart, toes slightly flared. That's what works best for me. It might be different for you. You may need toes straight. But then also I'm pulling my knees as far back as I can physically bring them in this movement. And for me, I've noticed that that has worked tremendously for me in terms of results, in terms of growth, and in terms of just strength. and minimizing knee pain. I have no knee pain now, and I used to have a lot of knee pain when I had my feet higher up and I only worked at a 90-degree angle and I didn't go all the way down and I didn't let my knees go over my toes. I have no knee pain anymore because I started training properly in a deep enough range that my body can actually handle, and then just gradually worked up to a heavier and heavier weight. Last tip, I don't want you coming down into a deep range that you're not used to and then having your lower back or your hips start to round off the pad. You want to make sure that your spine is as neutral as possible on this pad. If anything, you're arching your lower back, driving your glutes or your hips or your tailbone rather into this back pad the entire time. So you're not letting it round forward to try to get that extra range. That would be passive, not active. Okay. Mm. 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 5 more. Gotta slow that down. Good. Mm. Mm. Oh, I'm dead. That's it. We're gonna move on to some hamstring curls now, and then we're gonna finish off with just some leg extensions. Probably 3 to 4 sets of each, and then we'll call it. Mm. 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 So we're gonna do 3 working sets here, aiming for about 15 reps. We're gonna include partial reps. So when I start to kind of have form failure or I can't get a full rep, I'm just gonna go and do as many partials. Well, not necessarily as many as I can do, but a controlled form. So roughly around 5 to 6 extra partial reps towards the end of the set. One thing I'm thinking about when I'm doing this is because this pad is kind of on a deficit, or it's lower, set lower on this machine, it automatically keeps my chest up. So all I'm really thinking about is grabbing those handles and pulling down, engaging my lats, trying to keep my hips as stable as possible the entire time of the movement, almost crunching in on my abs. Again, the goal is to maintain as much stability through the movement as possible. That's going to allow you to drive as much force into the hamstrings as possible. And then lastly is knee positioning. I want my knees to be pointed straight down towards the ground. Because this is a hinge joint, it only moves in one direction. So there's no point in me having, you know, my toes flared out. I'd much rather not worry about where my feet are, but worry about where my joint is, my knee joint, and have it pointed directly to the ground. That way I can ensure that the joint, my hamstring, is working in the same path or the line of force of the actual machine. All right, last set. So I'm pulling into those handles, engaging my core, keeping my hips stable, making sure my knees are pointed to the ground. And then as I initiate the movement, I'm actually driving the top part of my leg or my quad into that pad. Done. I'll do a drop set just because I didn't get close to 15. I got about 10 with partials. So we're gonna go again as many reps as I could do. That's it. All right, we're gonna move on to some leg extensions. 3 sets there, same concept, and I'll run you through the form, and then that's gonna be it. When doing these, I recommend using these wrist straps. It helps a lot. I started using them recently. It helps me keep myself on this pad the entire time, pulling myself without my grip becoming a limiting factor in the movement. It just gives me more leverage to allow me to generate more force through my quads, to keep me stable. Same rules apply, just like the hamstring curls. I want to make sure my knees pointed straight or to the ceiling the entire time. I'm not keeping them flared out at all in the movement. Because again, remember, this is a hinge joint. It only moves in one direction. And so is this machine. It's fixed. It only moves in one direction as well. So I want to make sure that my joint path is lined up with the actual path or line of force of this machine. Next, pulling yourself, like I said, into this pad the entire time, keeping yourself stable. As you initiate the movement, you're going to be driving this bottom part of your leg into this pad. I mean, naturally, you're going to do it anyways, but I like to think about almost forcefully pushing into this pad as I initiate that movement. Again, I'm not flaring toes. I'm not even worried about toes. I'm making sure my knees are straight. And then lastly, some people ask if you can pull your toes up towards your shin as you do this. There's nothing wrong with that. The only issue is you could run into a lack of range of motion. Because if your calf is super tight and your calf crosses the knee joint, if it's super tight and you're in this position, you may not be able to fully extend as you would if you're just loose or relaxed or having your toe slightly pointed. So by having it curled in, you'll actually feel a lot more tension behind your knee. This isn't a bad thing, but it might just minimize your range of motion and not allow you to get a full contraction at the top here. So something to be conscious about. Second set to failure. Ooh. 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 Last set, I went a little bit heavier, and just gonna finish strong. Oh, shit. All right, guys, that was it for the leg session. Hopefully you guys learned something through this. This is just how I train and how I structure my workouts. It might not be right in some people's eyes, but this is, again, how I do it and what I find works for me. I'm always open to learning, and hopefully you are too. So hopefully you learn something. And again, this is just kind of what I think about in terms of the execution of the exercises, my form and setup. Those are the things that I find extremely important, more important almost than the structure of the actual workout. I'd rather just go in knowing that I know how to perfect all the exercises that I'm doing than be so particular about how I structure them in my workout. I think form and execution and setup comes first for each exercise, and then after that you can get into the nitty-gritty of your actual setup and structure of the workout. So that's it. I'll see you on the next video. And for the next leg day, I will show you how I do hamstrings and glutes, and we'll sprinkle in a little bit of quads.